So I've been learning a lot about nulls in GraphQL, and they have a lot to do with error handling, because if you have an error while getting a field, you are supposed to return null according to the spec. And I had a little bit of an existential crisis about nulls, which is very fitting because there seems to be a lot of different interpretations of the spec out there. So I thought I would share that with you. So here's the spec, what the spec says. Return partial data with null for the erroring field plus errors. So you have the data and you have the errors. The data has whatever objects. Let's say you couldn't get name, that one is null, but you have the rest of the fields, so you have partial data. And then you have errors with a message saying I couldn't get name. You might want to check on that. So you can still display some of the data if you want to. Apollo's interpretation of this is there are 3 different options, and you have an error policy setting where you can set what you want. So the one that is kind of matching the spec is all, where you get both the data and the errors. But the default one is none, where you treat GraphQL errors like network errors and you ignore the data. So if you have an error, you don't want the partial data. You just don't want anything. Ignore is if you just want the data and you want to ignore the errors. So this is how you set that. In use query, you just set the error policy to whatever you want. And then for Relay's interpretation of this is kind of matching this ignore case here. If there's an error, unless the fetch function throws an error or the data field is not returned, we ignore the error and we just get the data. Relay recommends modeling errors in your schema rather than returning null. So we just pretend, even if there's an error, that it was all good, that it was a success. So here is how you might model this error type with the message, and then enable that type on the field that might have the error. You return an error type that masquerades as a success. So you still get the data, and then your client-side code has to get the error from inside there. That's pretty much it for the summary. So the spec is kind of like glass is half full kind of approach. Relay also kind of optimistic approach. Apollo defaults to a more strict approach where it assumes that the error is the end of the world, but it gives you options. If you want a different approach, you can go with that. So that's pretty much it. And here's some cute animals for you for making it to the end.